After the Twilight Highlands incident, the Alliance and Hellscream's forces entered a new phase of the war, with neither being willing, or more likely able, to commit to the defense against Deathwing or the Hammer, with one small exception. Similarly, most of the champions had been focused elsewhere. Thus, in absence of both, despite their relative weakness, the Twilight Remnants, with Fire Elemental aid, had managed to push their assault up to the World Tree itself. The first champions had begun to arrive just as Deathwing himself managed to aid in summoning Ragnaros into the world. The champions quickly started a counterpush down the mountain, but issues arose immediately. There were fire elementals everywhere, and just the fighting itself was causing damage to the nearby terrain, which in turn depowered the defending druids. Worse, the enemy made a charge upon the Barrow Dens in an effort to free Fandral Staghelm. The nearby Green Drake Alisra volunteered to escort him away to Moonglade. Neither would make it there. Seeking aid, the champions were tasked with attempting to return several dead Loa to the world, ancients who died in the fighting during the Legion's first assault millennia ago. Fortunately for them, powerful spirit beings such as these ancients, upon death, returned to the Ardenweald to be nurtured and regrown back into the living as a part of a deliberate cycle of rebirth. Thus, several ancients assisted in the fighting, including Cenarius, Aviana, Goldrin, and Tortola. It just wasn't enough, though. The fires spread rampant, and the Fireland forces seemed endless. With a direct connection to their realm, they might as well be. In this moment, the Loa of the Forest, Aecina, quite possibly one of the most powerful of the ancients, reached out to the champions. With the greater bulk of her power, she erased the Inferno, and sent forth blooming energies into the charred remains of the forest, simultaneously depowering the assault and renewing the energies of those who fought in Hyjal's defense. With this, at last, the tide turned. Champion and Druid alike charged down the mountain, wasting no time in their counter-offensive. Twilight forces were scoured, with forays into pockets of the Firelands to cut off reinforcements, and they began to scout and infiltrate the Hammer itself. It was discovered the Hammer was holding Gerard Shadowsong, the Warden Maev's brother, prisoner, with the intent to sacrifice him to bolster their cause. A brave champion managed to infiltrate the cultists and maneuver their way to Gerard, freeing him. You might reasonably ask, why? Why go to such effort? Well, Gerard was a nobody back in the day, a regular captain of the guard of no particular position or prestige, until the War of the Ancients, where by virtue of confidence and skill, he rose to become the senior military commander for the entire anti-Legion resistance. Thus, even now, millennia later, Gerard's words carry weight with ancient elf and dragon alike. Gerard quickly coordinated these disparate groups into a lean fighting machine, and in a series of quick and careful counterstrikes completely cut off the Twilight's Hammer from their Fireland supporters. This was immediately followed by the strongest present fighting Ragnaros himself to a standstill, forcing his retreat from the field. But they were not done. As with the other three elemental planes, the recent instability meant the Firelands was physically accessible to Azeroth, and, as with the other three, this connection worked both ways. Thus the strongest and the bravest of the champions, bolstered by the greatest druids of the land, pushed into the Firelands itself, and fought a protracted battle to claim the Molten Front. Once positioned, they charged into the seat of living flame itself. The Firelands was just as politically bent as Skywall. Many ambitious lords and ladies fought with each other constantly for power and prominence. This proved to be the champion's benefit, as Beth'tselc was primarily focused on her fellows, allowing the champions to attack with relative impunity. The Cinderweb matriarch loved to feast on the magma of her fellow elementals, and so her passing would not be missed, but with such a significant leader killed, the Flamewaker Shanox took notice. Shanox was not some great leader or high-ranking official, but he was still a Flamewalker, and his charge was dispensing justice. Thinking one of the other lords had moved out of the bounds of acceptability with the death of Beth'tselc, he was shocked to find mortal champions instead, and was utterly unprepared for their assault. The ancient magma giant Rhyolith was old enough to remember the times before the elemental planes even existed, and still burned with anger over the incident. Unfortunately, with age came arrogance, and he barely considered the mortals worthy of his time, leading to his termination. This just left the Green Drake Alisra. For reasons uncertain, Elisra had converted to serving the old gods and secreted away Fandral whilst others were elsewise distracted. In return for her servitude, she was reborn as the Firehawk Elisrazor and eagerly sought to test her new power on the champions. Sadly for her, her flame swiftly burned out, leaving only the final defender of the Sulfuron Keep, Balarok. Balarok was a fire elemental whose mind was lost to battle lust, and as such, Ragnaros positioned him at the only entrance to his private domain, to dissuade any from passing without permission. With his fall was left Fandral. Poor, mad Fandral Staghelm. The former druid has been with our story since the beginning, driven mad by the loss of his son in the Shifting Sands, personally responsible for the corruption of Teldrassil and the imprisonment of the druids, and he has been serving as puppet of Xavius for years now. Fandral's aims were astonishingly simple. If his son did not deserve to live, then neither did anything else. And so Fandral served as chief executor for Ragnaros, last of the Twilight's main forces, focused on bringing ruin to Azeroth. It is hoped that with his final passing he would finally know peace. This just left the Fire Lord, Ragnaros. Ragnaros was furious, but cautious. He was aware of the fall of Al'Akir, and he knew he was vulnerable here in his home plane. In fact, during the fight with the champions, he sought to flee, but the combined efforts of the Archdruids prevented such egress, enraging Ragnaros and escalating the conflict even further. But it was no use, and the Fire Lord was permanently destroyed, leaving the world without 2 of its elemental lords. With this, the Twilight's Hammer power base was completely broken, and both of their elemental backers were removed from significance. They would gather what they had left for one final push, however. It was only a matter of time.